You are the last of many. For most of the human story, you would not have been the only kind of human walking the earth, and the others are gone now, extinct, and yet somehow not entirely gone at all. Right now, if your ancestors came from anywhere outside Africa, you are carrying pieces of them inside you. So let me ask you something that sounds simple and turns out to be one of the strangest questions in all of science. What happened to the other humans? Did we outlive them, outthink them, outbreed them, or did we simply fold them into ourselves until there was only us left standing? Start with a fact that most people never really absorb. Being the only human species on the planet is not normal. It is not how things usually were. For hundreds of thousands of years, the world was crowded with different kinds of people. The Smithsonian's Human Origins program recognizes several other species in our own genus, Homo, that existed alongside or before us. And after Homo sapiens first appeared in Africa around 300,000 years ago, we overlapped with a whole cast of relatives. Picture it, the Neanderthals were living across Europe and Western Asia, stocky and strong and anything but stupid. The Denisovans, a group so mysterious we mostly know them from DNA and a handful of bones, ranged across Asia. In Indonesia, on the island of Flores, there were the tiny people we nicknamed the hobbits, Homo floresiensis, who stood only about 3.5 feet tall. In South Africa, there was Homo naledi. In the Philippines, Homo luzonensis. And the long-legged Homo erectus was still out there too. These were not your grandparents. They were more like your cousins, separate branches that split from a shared root and wandered off in their own directions. Now sit with how eerie that is. If you had been alive 50,000 years ago, you might have crossed a ridge and met people who were unmistakably human, who made tools and used fire and buried their dead, and who were not your species. The hobbits of Flores are a perfect example of how alien and yet how familiar these cousins could be. They were tiny, with brains the size of a chimpanzee's, most likely shrunk over countless generations by island living. And yet with those small brains, they still made stone tools, still hunted, and still stood on two legs like you. And then, one by one, all of these relatives vanished. The last traces of the hobbits on Flores date to around 50,000 years ago. The Neanderthals faded roughly between 50 and 40,000 years ago, right around the time our kind was spreading into their world. Species after species disappeared as we grew in number, until the crowded family tree had exactly one branch left, yours. So the obvious question arrives. Did we do it? Did we kill them? Here's where you have to slow down because the honest answer is that scientists do not think there was one single cause, and the most dramatic version of the story is probably the least accurate. Researchers have proposed a whole menu of explanations, and they are not mutually exclusive. One is climate. The Neanderthals lived through wild swings in temperature and vegetation, and some of those changes may have shredded the landscapes they depended on. Another is competition. When our ancestors arrived, we may have hunted the same animals and gathered the same plants, and if we had even slightly better tools, broader diets, or larger social networks, we could have slowly squeezed them out without ever raising a weapon. But maybe the most humbling theory is the quietest one. The Neanderthal populations were already small before we ever showed up, and small populations are fragile in ways that have nothing to do with being weak or inferior. Conservation biologists talk about inbreeding, about random bad luck, about the way tiny scattered groups can spiral downward even when nothing is obviously hunting them. Some models suggest that demography alone might have been enough. In other words, even if Neanderthals had been every bit as clever and capable as us, and even if we had never competed with them at all, their small numbers may have carried a serious risk of extinction on their own. That reframes the whole thing. We may not have needed to defeat them. History may have been thinning them out already. And then there's the theory that gives this entire story its twist, the one that turns extinction into something far stranger. Interbreeding. Because the other humans did not only compete with us and die around us. Some of them met us and had children with us, and those children had children all the way down to you. This is not speculation. It is written in your genome. In 2010, a team led by the Swedish geneticist Svante Paabo at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology did something the Nobel Committee later called seemingly impossible. They sequenced the first Neanderthal genome, pulling readable DNA out of bones tens of thousands of years old. And when they compared it to living people, they found the unmistakable signature of interbreeding. Paabo won the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for this work. The verdict is now solid. If your roots lie outside Africa, somewhere around 1 to 2% of your DNA, and by some measures a little more, was inherited from Neanderthals, they are not entirely extinct. They are riding along inside billions of people, including, very possibly, you. The Denisovans left their mark too, and here the story gets genuinely beautiful. Paabo's team discovered the Denisovans almost entirely from genetic material in a single small finger bone, and it turns out their DNA lives on in present-day Asian and Melanesian populations. But the most striking gift is this. High on the Tibetan Plateau, where the air holds so little oxygen that outsiders can fall dangerously ill, Tibetans thrive, and a big reason is a version of a gene called EPAS1. In 2014, researchers publishing in the journal Nature showed that this exact high-altitude variant came from the Denisovans, an extinct kind of human, gone for tens of thousands of years, is the reason living people can breathe easily at the top of the world. Their bodies are gone, their advantage remains woven into ours. If you love this kind of stuff, subscribe, because I go deep on a new question about being human every single week. So, circle back to where we started. Did we breed out the Neanderthals? The careful answer is that breeding was part of it, but not the whole of it. There is a real scientific debate here, and reasonable researchers weigh the pieces differently. Some argue that competition drove the sharpest decline and that interbreeding was a minor thread. Others have built models where steady, small waves of our ancestors mixing into Neanderthal groups could, over 10 to 30,000 years, dilute them almost completely, absorbing them rather than slaughtering them. Climate, competition, small dwindling numbers, possibly diseases we carried with us, and interbreeding all seem to have pressed at once, in different places, at different times. There was probably no single villain and no single moment. There was a long, uneven fading, and at the end of it, a merging, which leaves you with a thought worth holding on to. You are not the winner of some clean war against the other humans. You are, in a real sense, the survivor of a family, and you are also their inheritor. When you feel the cold and your body responds, when your immune system fights off an infection in a particular way, when a Tibetan mountaineer climbs where others cannot follow, the ancient dead are quietly at work. We tend to imagine extinction as a door slamming shut, a species simply blinking out of existence. But the Neanderthals and the Denisovans found a stranger fate. They did not entirely end. They were folded in. You are the last human species on Earth. That is a lonely fact, and it is a recent one. And for almost all of the time our lineage has existed, it was not true. The others are out there only in fragments now, in cave floors and museum drawers, and lines of code on a scientist's screen. But they are also here, closer than any fossil, in the coiled instructions inside almost every cell you have. You did not just replace them. You remember them in the oldest language there is. And every time a new person is born and takes their first breath, a little of the lost world takes that breath too.